What is going on, guys? Welcome to part 2 of the Spotify series. In the first part, we set up a basic foundation of the app. And in this part, we're going to set up authentication and let the user sign in. So this is quite a bit of content. So I'm going to try to do it fairly quickly. That all said, make sure you start by liking the video and subscribing if you're new. Let's open up Xcode and dive back into the project that we were working with. If you recall, we created an auth manager property, or rather an object here, a file here, and this object is responsible for handling all the authentication related logic. So Spotify uses the OAuth 2 standard, and that standard, if you're not familiar, has principles of getting an access token on behalf of a user, and that token expires after a certain number of times. So you also need to go ahead and get a refresh token. And if the token is expired, you would go ahead and refresh and get a new one. Now, tokens also have related scopes. So we ask the user, give us permission to do X, Y, and Z on your behalf. And we're going to set that all up on the Spotify dashboard in just a minute. Now, when the user signs in, we basically load up the sign-in page in a web view, which we'll show in a moment. But let's go ahead and head on over to Spotify's developer website. So that is developer.spotify.com. You can create a free account. It's totally free. Sign up, go to their dashboard once you have signed in, and we're going to create a new application here. So this is an application instance that we are creating on the Spotify dashboard, and this will give us tokens that we can use to identify our app. So I'm going to call it Spotify, and we'll see if this gives us a problem. As we're going on, maybe Spotify doesn't allow us to use their name. We're going to check these boxes and pretend like we read all the terms and services. We're going to go ahead and create it. It looks like there wasn't an issue, so it gave us a client ID here, as well as this link to show a client secret. Normally, you would want to keep your client secret on a backend server for security, but since we're not dealing with that, I'm going to copy both of these and bring them into our auth manager here. So in our auth manager, I am going to create a struct called constants, and I like putting in these strings into properties in here, since we will need to use them in a variety of places in this file. And it's kind of annoying to copy and paste it, and more importantly, it's a little error prone. So it's always good practice to make them constants, just like that. The next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and edit this application. And you'll see here that we can go ahead and enter in some information. So the one that's important is the redirect URIs. So I'm going to paste in iosacademy.io. This is basically where the user gets redirected after they have signed into your app. So let's go ahead and hit add there. Let's see, bundle ID, that's not required. So I'm going to be lazy and not add it. And let's go ahead and hit save, and you should be good to go. Let me just refresh the page here and make sure it's all showing. Let's just hit edit and make sure our URI is still here. Looking good. So the next thing we want to do is load up from our app. When we tap on a button that presumably is here to sign in with Spotify, we want to load up the sign-in page. And if you recall, we created a controller under other called Auth View Controller. And this is basically where we're going to load up the authentication page in a web view. So let's go ahead and get rid of that commented code. I'm also going to say in here the title is going to be sign in. Let's go ahead and give it a background color of system background. And we want to go ahead and create a web view. So to do that, we're going to bring in UIKit, which is the Apple provided framework for web views. So we're going to create a web view, which is a WK web view like that. Let's go ahead and create it. And inside this anonymous closure, we can simply create a WK web view with a frame and configuration. Frame is 0, config is config, if I can spell it correctly. Now in the config, we're just going to allow JavaScript to be enabled. So we're going to say WK web view configuration. And let's see, this config, I believe, has a web page preferences, default web page preferences. So we're going to say this is prefs. Let's go ahead and create this one line up. We'll say prefs is WK web page preferences. And on this, there is a allows content JavaScript property, which will assign to true. And of course, don't forget to return this web view since we are in an anonymous closure. Now that we've gone ahead and created that, we're going to add this as a sub view here. And we want to load up the URL, to sign the user in, which we don't have yet. So let's just leave that empty. We're going to override view did layout sub views, just like that. And we're going to go ahead and make this web views frame the entirety of the view controller's bounds, just like that. And that should be good for now. Let me actually also, because we want to know when the page, loads. So we're also going to assign its navigation delegate to be self. Once the page, redirects to our redirect URI, or, an error occurs, we want to make sure that, we can detect all those events. So we're going to say this class also conforms to the WK navigation delegate. Now on our other screen here, we want to go ahead and add a sign in button. So this was the welcome view controller. So I'm going to jump in here and we are going to do a few things. First of all, we're going to want to lay out that button. So we're going to override view did layout sub views, just like that. We are also going to want to have an action handler for the button. So we'll say did tap sign in. And when sign in is tapped, we're going to create an instance of the auth view controller. We're going to say it's navigation item, if I can spell it correctly, navigation item. Its large title display mode will be never, so it gets smaller. And then what we'll do is here we'll go ahead and push that view controller onto the screen, just like that. Now we also want to have that button, of course. So let's come up here and create a pretty simple button. I have an idea to make this button look a lot nicer, but for the sake of getting this kind of working, we're gonna go through this very quickly. So here is our button. We're gonna return the button here. Let's go ahead and give it a nice background color of, let's say, white. We'll also say it has a title, of course, because we need something to see to tap on. We'll say sign in with Spotify. The type will be normal, the state. And let's see, we're also going to give it a title color. We'll go ahead and say this is black for normal. Let me also give it a corner radius. Let's skip the corner radius actually for the sake of time. And let's call this a better name. We'll call it a sign in button. And let me go ahead and add this onto our view. So we're going to say view, add subview, sign in button. We also want to attach that function, that selector that we created down below. So we'll say add target itself. The selector is did tap sign in, and the event is touch up inside. Now, of course, don't forget the most important thing, give your button a frame. We'll give it a frame of, let's say, 20 from the left. The Y is going to be the bottom, up a little bit. Let's just make all of these, make that 1 for a moment. And I'm going to show you guys a handy little trick. Since we are going to be doing frame-based layouts, I don't want to have to type, the whole frame.size.width a million times. So in our resources here, let's go ahead and create a new file. And we're going to call it extensions. It can just be a blank Swift file. And go ahead and call this extensions.swift. And we're going to add a couple computed properties that are extending off of UI view. And we can do things like width. And width is basically, let's go ahead and import UIKit just like that. Width is going to be the frame.size.width. So instead of having to type this whole thing, you can now just type this. So I'm going to add a couple more computed properties, which are really going to help us, speed through building this app. So we're going to want things that you can imagine. Height we're going to want, which is going to simply be height of the frame. We're also going to want the left side of a given frame, which is going to be the origin X. We might also want the right side, which is going to be the left plus the width. We're going to want the top of a frame, which can be the origin Y. And we actually want one more here. Let me copy and paste that one more time. We're also going to want the bottom of a frame, which is going to be nothing more than the top plus the height. Hopefully that math all made sense. It's pretty simple, but this will make your life a whole lot easier. Now, if we go back to the welcome view controller, laying out this button is now much easier. The Y can simply be the view dot height, subtracting 50, subtracting view dot safe area dot bottom. The width here can be view.width subtracting 40, and the height will be 50, which is our constant. Let me just hit Control I to align all of that. And let's go ahead and give it a Command R to build and run. And let's make sure that we have a button down here, and tapping it pushes on another view controller. So our simulator is just deciding to be slow. Just bear with it. There is our handy button at the bottom. We can go ahead and tap on it, and it pushes on this other sign-in screen. Of course, nothing is loading just yet. I'm not going to stylize it too much, but the other important thing we need is once the user, either successfully signs in here or cancels, we want to go ahead and return something from this auth controller to the other controller so it knows that we're successfully done. So we are going to add a public var on here, which is going to be completion handler. And it's basically going to be a closure that returns a Boolean as the property, and the closure returns void. And this is going to basically tell our welcome controller that, hey, the user has successfully signed in. So here we can now say the completion handler is success in, just like that. And let's see. So completion handler, let's make sure I put that in the right place. Looks like we called it completion. It's a public var, and it looks correct to me. I might have spelt it incorrectly. Let's go back to that welcome view controller. Let's see what the problem is. Let's see, unable to infer type of closure parameter. Success in, there we go, because I had a typo in there. So in here, what we can go ahead and do now is we can say, we can handle the result of the sign-in. So we're going to say weak self. And in this block, we're going to do on the main thread, self dot handle sign in success is going to be success. Now we have not created this function yet, so I'm going to create this right down below. And this is going to be handle sign in, takes a success parameter, which is of type bool. And then in here, we'll basically log user in or yell at them for error. So looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and actually configure all the stuff we need here to load up the web view. So if we come back to our browser, I've got a bunch of links open. And the first one here is just their API reference to all their endpoints. They've got quite a few of them. The second one here is a list of scopes you can request from the user, basically permissions to do different things. The third one here is, how to walk through the authorization process to let the user sign in. So I'm not going to read all of this, but we're going to implement it. So the first thing that you're going to want to go ahead and need to do is you need to go ahead and direct the user to the sign-in page. So they gave an example here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And unfortunately, we're going to have to format it a little bit, but let's go into our auth manager. And what I like to do is let's add another property here, which is a public var. And this is going to be sign in URL, which is going to return an optional URL. And I'm going to go ahead and say the string here is our URL. Now let's go ahead and format this. So the beginning of this part is perfectly fine. And we don't need to add stuff like this. So we can say that this is response code, or response type is code. The next thing that it wants is the client ID as a query parameter. So we're going to say client ID. And instead of this being, something random like this, so we can go ahead and say here is this is our constants.client ID. And let's see what the next thing here is. So the next thing here, it looks like it wants our scopes. So we're going to do this in just a moment. So we're going to say scopes is encoded URI component for scopes. So let's see. Let me see if we can just move that back there. And let's see. So this should be escaped. So let's see, something weird is going on. All right. Our URL is starting to get a lot longer. We might want to break it up in just a moment. And the last thing is redirect URI, which we'll also do in a moment. So let me go ahead and put that there as well. I'm going to break this up in just a second because it's getting a little ridiculous. So let's go ahead and do that. And I guess the first thing that we'll go ahead and do is let me pull this base URL out into its own thing. So we'll say this is base, and I'm going to go ahead and say here that this is the base URL for our API. We'll take the base. I'm going to drop it in here just like that. Response type is code. Client ID is client ID. Scope, we're just going to grab one scope from the list here since there's so many. Once we have one of them working, we can always go back and add as many more as we want on it. So the scope that I'm going to grab is user-read-private. So we'll just have one scope for now. So I am going to actually add scope as another constant here, just for the sake of keeping things nice and organized. So we're going to say scopes is user-read-private, just like that. Make sure you spell it correctly, or of course you're going to have errors. So let me go ahead and copy that scopes property, and let's stick it into the parameter for scopes. Instead of foo, we're going to come in here and I'm going to say this is scopes. And finally, our redirect URI is our actual URI that we entered in. Now it needs to be URL encoded, but let's see if we can get away with it, just being indirectly. So we're going to say redirect URI is going to be the website we entered, which is iosacademy.io, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And we are simply going to stick it in just like that. And finally, now that we have this string here, we can go ahead and return a URL with a string, passing that string in just like that. Go ahead and hit Command B, and you should be compiling. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is when our app launches, let's just go ahead and print out that URL so we can actually see what the heck we're doing. So in the app delegate, I'm going to say print out the auth manager shared and sign in URL dot absolute string. And I'm going to try to open up that string, that URL rather, in a browser to make sure that it's valid. So here is what we are logging. Let's go ahead and open up a new window here. I'm going to paste it in. And here it is telling us to sign in. So let's go ahead and sign in with the account that I've created. So that is hello at iOS Academy.io, and the password is password, capital P, 123. Let's go ahead and sign in. Let's see if we have any issues. Looks like we already have an issue. Invalid client, invalid redirect URI. The reason we're getting that is because we're not encoding it. So let's go back to our auth manager and encode this redirect URI. So let's see, we have it as, I don't know if we added the www now that I think about it. So let me go back to the browser. Let's go back to the dashboard. Let's take a look at our redirect URI. This is, all right, it looks like we do have, let me just copy and paste it actually so we don't have any issues. It looks like we don't have a slash at the end there. So let's go ahead and drop that in right here. And let's see, we want to go ahead and escape the percentages. So adding percentage encoding with allowed characters is what we can go ahead and use. And this is a enum, so you can go ahead and let's see, allowed characters. We can say, let's see, there should be one in here for a URL. So we can say URL. There should be a couple URL options. We can say URL query allowed, URL password allowed. We can say URL queried allowed. And go ahead and give it a run one more time, and let's see what we get printed out here. Looks like we're getting nil now, so that's not good. So let's see what's going on. So we are going to say, let's see, we don't want to escape anything. Let me try that one more time. Maybe the slash at the end was screwing us up. So we're going to grab all of this. I am going to take that. That is the redirect URI. We're going to come back to this browser window. We'll paste that in. Oh, and there we go. Okay, now it looks like it's working. You agreed to Spotify. Will be able to view your Spotify account data, blah, blah, blah. Here's the logged in user. And once we agree, it's going to ask us the various scopes, I believe, and then rather it actually redirects us directly to the iOS Academy website. But what's interesting up here is you can see in the redirect, it gives us a code. Now we can use this code and exchange it for an access token for this user. So now that this is working actually, so we can do is in the auth manager, we can load this up in a web view. So in the auth view controller in view.load, what we can do is we can say guard let URL is auth manager dot shared dot sign in URL, and we want to make sure it's not nil. And once we've got it unwrapped, we can say web view load, and we can go ahead and load up a URL request with a URL of URL. Go ahead and give that a run. And let's make sure we can load up that Spotify sign-in page. So boom, there's our Spotify sign-in page. And there's actually one more thing we want to include in our actual URL there. You'll see if you come back here, there should be a option. Let's see. I believe it's called something like shows dialogue. So you can make sure that you get the sign-in dialogue every time. Let me search this page for dialogue here. There it is. So we're going to say shows dialogue. And this is set to false by default, but we're going to set it to true. And what that does is it's going to make sure that it always shows us the sign-in prompts to make sure the user explicitly gives us permission to use their account data. So I'm going to come in here and we're going to say and shows dialog is true. Let's go ahead and give that a run and make sure that it's still showing the web view. Looking pretty great. Now, it's pretty simple, actually, what the thing we need to do after. I might split this up into 2 videos since it's gotten long, but because we added observance to the navigation delegate for the web view, what we could do is we want to override now did start, whoops, we don't want capital, it did start provisioning. And in here, we can get basically the URL that has started to load. So we'll say guard let URL is webview dot URL. I believe that's optional. Let me just double check. Webview.url. Yep, it in fact is. And we can go ahead and unwrap it just like that. And what we're going to go ahead and do now is if the URL has a parameter for code, we want to get that out, because the way this works is we want to now exchange the code that Spotify gives us after the user allows permission for access token. So the way we can do that is we can say the query components, rather the URL components, is URL components of a particular URL. So we're going to say this is URL dot absolute string. And from this query components, we can say the code is from the components, the query items first where basically the query item's name is code, and we want to get its value. And this is all going to be optional, so we want to definitely make sure to do a guardlet to make sure we can unwrap it. And you can actually just move this whole thing into the same line here. It gets a little long, but it's less code. So that's basically that. And what I'm going to do now here is we will simply print out the code to make sure we got it. So let's go ahead and give this a run in the simulator. Let's make sure that we can actually get that code out. So we're still printing in that login URL. So let's jump back to the app delegate. Looks like my keyboard is being a pain right now. Let's jump back to the app delegate here and get rid of that print. To get that window to open up to search for files, you can hit Command-Shift-O. Fun fact, pretty handy. So let's go back to auth controller, give it a run once more. And let's try to sign in here. So we're not done yet. Once we've signed in, we'll get the code. So we're about halfway there. So the email once again is hello@iosacademy.io. Please create your own account. I'm going to change the password for this before uploading the video, just for sake of security, obviously. So let's go ahead and sign in here and let's see if we have any issues. Looks like I typed in the password wrong, maybe. Let's see, it looks like iOS Academy. That's all spelled correctly. Let's try that once more. All right, password 123. Let's try that one more time. And I'm apparently typing in the password wrong, so we're going to do that one more time. So here we are going to say the email. And this is password 1, 2, 3. I wonder if they can show it to us, maybe not. There we go. We can go ahead and continue. And what it's basically saying is, allow permission for Spotify, which is what our app is called, which is definitely not allowed, if you're running a production app, to get your data. And keep a quick eye or a close eye on the console here. Once we go ahead and allow this, this is going to redirect to the iOS Academy website. But we are going to get the code out of the query parameters, which is pretty great now because now we can exchange this code for an access token. Now, we don't want to do that directly here in the view controller because it's kind of not an appropriate place for it to live. So I'm going to add a function here on our auth manager, and this is going to be called public func exchange code for token, and it's going to take in a code which is going to be a string just like that. So let's make sure this is a colon. And it's also going to have a parameter of a completion handler to let the caller know that it succeeded. So here I'm going to say completion is an escaping block, which gives us a bool back as a parameter and void. And let's see. So in here, what we're going to go ahead and do is essentially, let's see what this error is that it's giving us. Let's see, public func exchange, parentheses, something screwed up here. Looks like I'm missing maybe a curly somewhere, open paren. Okay, this one right here. There it is. So basically what we want to go ahead and do is in this function, we're going to make an API call to get token. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have a way to cache token. And you're also going to want to have a function to refresh the token. So I'm just going to stub that out and we're going to continue in the next video since this video is getting a little longer. And I want to keep them, a reasonable amount of time. Looks like in a valid read declaration, refresh, let's call this access token. Just like that. This video is getting a little longer. So authentication is a little tricky. It's kind of involved. It's not hard per se, but I don't want to go through it too quickly and I want to make all the mistakes along the way so everyone can learn from what I'm doing here. So if you enjoyed the video, definitely don't forget to drop a like down below, comment if you're confused about anything. If you have any questions, love hearing from you guys, and definitely subscribe to stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in part 3.